Hello and welcome to Books on the Go. I thought I'd do a non-fiction November TBR, and I have discovered in the process of getting the books for this, I have so many unread non-fiction books on my shelf. It's a pile that would topple over if I put them all in one pile. And, why haven't I read them? I think it's because some of them are quite not heavy, but quite chunky or detailed or dense in a way that I don't mind at all, except that that it'll take a couple of weeks or more to read it, one book. And so that takes me out of action in terms of all the other books that I'm trying to read. And in a normal week, I read at bedtime, I read at lunchtime, depending what's going on during the day. And that's really often the only time I get a chance to read. So I can't power through a book as I might when I'm on holidays. So they sort of sit there. Some I think will be much quicker reads. But let's go to the books. So first on my shelf, I have Directorate S. And I apologise about the lighting. There's some quite bright sunlight coming through, even though it's quite a cool day. So it might be a little bit inconsistent. But Directorate, see, I can put that right in the sun there. Directorate S by Steve Coll, and this is the one I'm reading at the moment. It's the CIA and America's secret wars in Afghanistan and Pakistan from 2001 to 2016. So he wrote Ghost Wars, I think it was, and that took the story up to 9/11 in 2001, and this then continues on and talks about the aftermath of that and the decisions that were made by the CIA and of course higher up in the government about their strategy and what to do about Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, it's quite interesting in terms of they tried to become an ally. Well, they tried to use Pakistan as their ally to control what was happening in Afghanistan, but they also didn't want to put a huge presence of people on the ground in Afghanistan. And the part that I'm up to, they've successfully forced the Taliban to leave Afghanistan, but they then have simultaneously started planning to have a war in Iraq. So they haven't quite finished the job, and they've left the country, or they haven't left completely, but left what they were doing without necessarily investing in the nation building that perhaps was needed, and in a way that perhaps left the Taliban, I think they might have underestimated how the Taliban might rebuild, and also the bitterness that was there perhaps amongst the people in Afghanistan, which fed into future conflict which will be coming, because I'm only up to about page 100, and so there's a lot still to go. It's a slow read for me, and I think this book has highlighted, because it's fairly small type, that I need reading glasses, and I've been putting it off for a couple of years, but I really sort of am finding it quite slow going, but that might be part of the reason. So I'm not sure whether to persevere, not that I'm not enjoying it, but just because I can see that it will take me a good couple of weeks to get through at the current rate. So that's Directorate S, but there's so much more to get through just in my non-fiction shelf. So The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History by Elizabeth Kolbert. I think this is a must read. It's not as long, but again, I think will be quite powerful. And this was referenced, all the ideas in it, I think were referenced in Bewilderment by Richard Powers, which I read recently, and I didn't love having that coming at me from a novel. I didn't love the way that was treated, and I did think as I was reading that I'd rather read this as a non-fiction book. And here is the book, I believe. It's 5 mass extinctions on Earth to date, and she combines on-the-spot reporting from Central America, the Andes, and the Great Barrier Reef, which I've been there recently, and so that's certainly on my mind, with the history of science to tell us the stories of a dozen species whose fates exemplify this enormous change. So we're currently in the next extinction, which will be the most devastating extinction since the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs. So it has a lot of really good blurbs and sounds like a must read, although it of course, will be confronting. So that's the sixth Extinction. Moving on to some non-fiction books that I really do want to read this month. And one is The Luminous Solution by Charlotte Wood. This sounds delightful, and also really, she's always such an interesting writer. This is about the creative life. It's based on research and also her own observations and reading what artists can teach us about hard work, how to pursue truth in art and life, and finding courage. And I find Charlotte Wood is nothing if not truthful in her writing, and I'm talking about her novels, which include The Natural Way of Things and The Weekend. And The Natural Way of Things, of course, which won the Stella Prize and was a very strong book. And The Weekend, a bit of a lighter read, more accessible read, but still unflinchingly honest about her characters and what that says about women and the lives of women and friendship and all sorts of things. So really, really interesting. She's such an intellect, but writes very cleanly and straightforwardly. So, you know, she's easy to read. I'm really looking forward to this. This is The Luminous Solution. So I will report back. I think that's definitely coming up in the next few weeks. So that's The Luminous Solution. Another one that Sean Mooney sent me, Birds Art Life by Keo Mcclear, which sounds absolutely delightful as well. And it's a memoir, but her bird watching, which she starts as a novice, as I understand it, but she's watching birds that are just local to her in the parks and gardens and suburbs around her, I think in Tokyo, but I could be wrong. And also how that enables her to get back in touch with her creative side. And it just sounds like the most beautiful memoir. I'm really looking forward to it. And then I think it's also been mentioned on the book review podcast, which I love, with Kate and Laura. So I have to go and find that episode. But it sounds like one that I didn't hear about when it came out, but that I'm really intrigued to read. So that's Birds Art Life. Also, I think coming up soon, one which I bought recently, The Best of Me by David Sedaris, and I just find his writing very sort of bitingly funny, but also comforting for some reason. I'm not sure why, but I just love sitting back, and I think because it's like being in his company and it's just like having someone tell you funny stories, and I love that. So I'm looking forward to this. That's The Best of Me, which I think is a best of collection of his work, but because I hadn't read his earlier work, this is really a good one for me to pick up. So I read Calypso, but I hadn't read the earlier books, which most of you probably have. So this one's a good starting point for me. After Calypso, another one which I know that I'll love is Olivia Laing, Everybody, a book about freedom. And it is chunky, to be honest, but I love her writing. She is always really thoughtful and interesting. I love seeing how her mind works. And we're back after some technical difficulties. So you might notice it's much later in the day now, so you might tell that the light has changed. I'm looking more dishevelled, but we'll pick up where I left off. So I was talking about Everybody by Olivia Laing, and what I love about Olivia Laing's work, the non-fiction that I've read before, is that she tackles a subject through the lens of interesting figures from history. And so in this case, she talks about the body and the human body, but she's talking about Nina Simone, Christopher Isherwood, Andrea Dworkin, Sigmund Freud, Susan Sontag, and Malcolm X. So that sounds absolutely fascinating. And I think I mentioned when I did a book haul of this book that Jason from Imprint said, I think he said it was the best non-fiction book he's read all year. So not that that would surprise me, because Olivia Laing is so excellent, but yeah, really looking forward to this, although it's quite a weighty one, but that's all good. Everybody. Next, I have The Barbers On by Paulina Bren, and this has a great cover. And this should be right up my alley because it's set in a hotel, and I love hotels. I love books set in hotels and the, I suppose, virtual holiday that you can get. So this is a New York hotel that set women free. So it's also quite an intriguing premise. And it's from a hotel that was built in 1927, and it was intended as a home for the modern woman with seeking a career in the arts. So that sounds really interesting, and it had 688 tiny floral, highly feminine boudoirs, and housed Sylvia Plath, Joan Crawford, Grace Kelly, Joan Didion, Candice Bergen, Liza Minnelli, among others. And so that sounds really interesting. A whole host of writers and actors who stayed there. So it sounds interesting. I haven't picked it up yet because I just haven't sort of found the opportunity. And to me, ideally, I would like to be reading this on a plane, going to New York, or indeed staying in New York and reading it. But that is not on the cards for a while. So in the meantime, perhaps this can take me there virtually. That's the Barbizon. And then I have a whole lot of books about history or politics in different countries that I'm interested in, some of which I prefer to read when I'm going to those countries, but it just hasn't been happening. So for obvious reasons. One country that's not high on my list to visit, but I'm fascinated by, is Russia. So this one is The Invention of Russia, The Journey from Gorbachev's Freedom to Putin's War by Arkady Ostrovsky. And this was shortlisted for the Orwell Prize in 2016. So it sounds really good, and it might pull together some other, I've read books on other topics, including Masha Gessen's brilliant book on Putin. I think it's The Man Without a Face. There's a book on the Litvinenko poisoning. Is that by Luke Harding? But this sounds like it'll be more comprehensive and pull the history together in the modern day, and where Russia is at now and how that has happened. So that's The Invention of Russia. Good title as well. This one, I'm just been waiting for the trip to Spain to read this, but it's not happening. So this is Roads to Santiago by Cees Nooteboom, or Nooteboom. I'm afraid I'm not sure how to pronounce his name correctly, but this is translated from the Dutch, and the translator is Ina Rilke, and it's a wide sweeping history of Spain through 10 centuries, through its history, politics and people. And I felt as if the Road to Santiago, isn't that Camino, there's that walk or pilgrimage that's quite famous, and I've had friends who've done it, and I thought that would be, not necessarily doing the walk, but visiting Spain would be the perfect time to read this. However, in the meantime, maybe this is as close as I'll get to going there. So Roads to Santiago, I'd be interested if any of you have read this one, because I think it's something of a classic of its genre, but and I've loved the couple of short novels that I've read of this author. So that's Roads to Santiago. Then some quite heavy, not heavy, but quite big books. The SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard. She's a wonderful writer, and I think I read her book Women and Power, a short book by her a couple of years ago, and she writes really cleanly and with she's very erudite, and obviously this is a subject that she's the doyenne of classical Rome, but very accessible, which helps me because it's not a subject I've studied at school or elsewhere. So she writes at a good level for the lay person. So this is A History of Ancient Rome. Again, I really wanted to read it in preparation for a trip to Italy. Trip to Italy hasn't been possible, but ancient Rome is something we can read about any time. And in fact, she does say, it says on the blurb that it has a lot to teach us about citizenship, terrorism, the rights of individuals, and how we think about civil liberty today. So I think it's one of those things that's endlessly topical and relevant. So that's a good one to pick up. Speaking of countries that are endlessly relevant, Greece, Biography of a Modern Nation by Roderick Beaton. And this has been described as the best history of Greece. So it is a modern history, and my father-in-law points out that the history of Greece is so ancient that I can't even read most of it, because to really read the history of Greece, you have to speak and read Greek, which I can't do. But this, for me, is at least a good understanding of the country as it is today, and the recent history in terms of world wars and how that there's been a huge amount of turmoil in Greece, even in the last sort of 100 or 200 years. I do find it a really fascinating country because of the ancient history as well, how much of the figures from ancient Greece, the mathematicians, the philosophers, the myths have fed into the stories we tell today and indeed the learning that we know today. So it's a country that I do want to know better, and this is apparently no visitor to Greece should leave home without it, an elegant introduction to this beguiling country. So I wouldn't take this on holiday, but I would perhaps read it in a lead up to a holiday to the Greek islands. But there you go, that's Greece. And I think it was written up recently in the Financial Times as well. They had a review of this one. So the other Greek book is, I bought this a couple of years ago, Bettany Hughes, The Hemlock Cup. And this is about Socrates, Athens, and the search for the good life. And again, two things about this. One is that Socrates, Athens, and the good life are still relevant today and still being reinvented, written about, adopted by new philosophers who are using those old ideas that were first discussed in ancient Athens. But also Bettany Hughes, I think in terms of reading about that time, Bettany Hughes is one of the foremost scholars on the subject, and again very accessible, and I'm really looking forward to reading it when I find the time for this one. So this again quite long. Yes, it's actually 400 odd pages, so it's not too bad, but really interesting. Let me know if you've read this one, The Hemlock Cup. So I cannot possibly get through all of these in 1 month, but I feel very lucky to have these all on my shelf. So really, whichever mood I'm in, whichever country I feel like traveling to, I've almost got everything covered. Let me know what you're reading for Nonfiction November and which of these you think I might need to pick up next. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts, and I'll see you soon. Bye.